Welcome to the debate. Today we are stepping into the long shadow of the Mongol Empire to analyze Robert Walker's historical novel, The Silent Khagan. Now, this isn't just a story about conquest, it's a fundamental reframing of how the Yuan Dynasty was actually built. Walker positions Empress Chabi not merely as Kublai Khan's wife, but as let's say, the operating system of the empire. A woman who exerted what he calls silent power through intelligence networks, financial manipulation, and cultural synthesis.
It is certainly a radical reframing. Walker presents us with a woman who understood that an empire cannot be ruled from horseback, which is, the classic Mongol problem. But I think the book asks a much darker question than just who ruled. It asks what that rule actually cost. We're looking at a narrative that explores the arithmetic of logistics, where civilization is purchased with starved children, flayed skins, and a kind of moral bankruptcy that it just chills you to the bone.
I see why you'd focus on the cost, and Walker is unflinching about it. We'll definitely get there, but I think the central thesis here is really about the triumph of pragmatic governance over brute force. Chabi represents a necessary evolution in human history. She is the force that civilized the Mongol conquest, moving it from extraction and plunder to administration and taxation. She built a universal empire by holding these contradictory forces together, the steppe and the sown, the warrior and the bureaucrat.
And I come at it from a different way. To me, Chabi represents the institutionalization of corruption and the weaponization of suffering. Her civilization wasn't a triumph. It was a devastating moral compromise. Her silence, that famous silence the title refers to, was often just a cover for the atrocities necessary to maintain power. So the question we're debating is this: was Chabi's silent governance a necessary act of creation, or did it hollow out the dynasty from the inside before it even fully began?
Let's start with that act of creation. Walker paints Chabi as a genius of interdependence. She isn't just reacting to events, she is shaping the very physics of the empire. It all starts with her upbringing in the Kongared tribe. Now, for our listeners who might not be deep into Mongol genealogy, the Kongared were the wife-giving tribe. They didn't provide warriors, they provided consorts to the Genghis line.
Which sounds passive, right? It sounds like they were commodities. But Walker makes it very clear it's anything but passive.
Exactly. The book uses this powerful, recurring metaphor of the mirror. Her mother teaches her that a mirror tells the truth by lying. It reverses the image. The Kongared women learned to reflect what men wanted to see, while at the same time reversing the image to shape those men's decisions. It's a masterclass in soft power. She learns to be the invisible hand that guides the sword arm, making the Khan feel powerful while she steers the horse.
It's a compelling metaphor, I'll give you that. But let's be precise about what that mirror actually is. It's manipulation. It's deceit. Walker writes that the Kongared power is showing the Borjigin princes a reflection of themselves that is loyal, devoted, supportive, so they never notice the image has been reversed. It's essentially gaslighting on a geopolitical scale. She's training herself to be a phantom in her own marriage.
I would frame it differently. It's not just deceit, it's survival and stabilization. Look at her mentorship under Sorgathani Beki, the mother of the great Khans. This is the pivotal moment in the book's first act. Sorgathani teaches Chabi a lesson that most Mongol leaders of the time simply couldn't grasp. You cannot ride away from an empire. You have to transition from plunder to management. Chabi absorbs this lesson that money is not about having, it is about owing.
But look at the application of that lesson. She built an intelligence network. When Mongol Khan dies, it's Chabi's network, her spies, her merchants, her ear to the ground that sends the warning to Kublai, allowing him to maneuver against his brother Arik Boki.
And that saved the dynasty. We have to give her credit there. Without that intelligence, Kublai is caught off guard, likely killed, and the empire fractures into chaos. She prevented the collapse.
She prevented the collapse of her own power, certainly. But let's look at how she did it. You call it stabilization, I call it the conversion of the violence of the steppe into the slow violence of bureaucracy. The book is very specific about this term. She uses bone tallies to count factions and lives. She treats human beings as variables in an equation. Walker explicitly contrasts her education with the reality on the ground. The empire that educated its daughters was built upon the bodies of those it conquered. You cannot separate the genius of her network from the slow violence it enabled.
That term, slow violence, is interesting, but I think it misses the alternative. The alternative was fast violence, total war, and that leads us directly to the civil war between Kublai and Erik Boki, which is, well, arguably the strongest test case for her methods. This is where the rubber meets the road.
This is the section where my blood really started to boil. This is where the Silent Khagan shows her teeth.
But look at the context. Kublai is fighting his brother for the throne. Erik Boki has the steppe warriors. He has tradition. Kublai has the Chinese infantry, which is slower, and he has the grain. The traditional Mongol way would have been a bloody war of attrition, armies just smashing into armies until one side is dead. Chabi proposes a different way. She looks at the map. She realizes Erik Boki commanded tradition, but Kublai commanded the calories.
So she weaponizes food. She weaponizes hunger.
She uses economics. She institutes a grain blockade. She argued that victory that looks like cruelty was preferable to endless war. By cutting off the food supply to the capital, Karakoram, she forced to surrender without the wholesale slaughter of tens of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield. That is the definition of pragmatic mercy. She stopped the bleeding by applying a tourniquet, even if the tourniquet hurt.
Mercy, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. That is such a sanitized view of starvation. And let me tell you why. Walker gives us the perspective of the common herder, Erdene. This isn't abstract economics to him. The blockade didn't just target soldiers. It targeted the elderly, it targeted children. There's that haunting scene, probably the most memorable in the book, where Erdene watches his horse, Wind, die of starvation. He buries his neighbors, including children, who froze to death because their caloric intake wasn't high enough to generate body heat to survive the winter. Chabi's blockade wasn't bloodless. It was just slow. It was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at her own people's heartland.
It was a weapon that ended the war. We have to look at the counterfactual here. The alternative was a conflict that could have dragged on for a decade, killing those same children and their fathers in combat. Chabi's logic, Sorghaghtani's logic, is that the arithmetic of logistics saves more lives in the aggregate. She even says the question was never whether the cost would be paid, the question was who would pay it. She chose to place the cost on the steppe to save the empire. It's brutal, yes, but it's the brutality of a surgeon amputating a gangrenous limb, not a butcher hacking at a body for sport.
A surgeon asks for consent. The people of the steppe didn't consent to starve so Kublai could build a marble hall in Beijing, and that's the core of my issue with her pragmatism. It always seems to require the silence of victims. Erdene's daughter only survives because she eats porridge made from the grain of the people who starved her. That's the moral rock at the center of this victory. It's not a triumph of governance. It's the realization that you can kill people more efficiently with a ledger than a sword. It's clean hands, dirty soul.
I think you're conflating the tragedy of war with the intent of governance. War is always hell. Chabi just made it a shorter hell. But let's move to the ledger itself, because that brings us to the second major point of contention, Ahmad Fanakati. This is where Chabi's pragmatism is most tested, and where the book really dives into the machinery of state.
Tested? I'd say it's where it fails completely. Ahmad Fanakati is the villain of the piece. By any standard. He's the finance minister, but he operates like a mob boss with a royal seal.
He's an outsider. We have to remember that. He's a Muslim from Central Asia in a court of Mongols and Chinese. He was brought in specifically to do the dirty work because he had no local constituency to please.
And boy, did he ever do the work. He imposes a 23% surcharge on everything. He runs shadow accounts, and eventually we find out the darkest secret of the book. He has flayed human skins in his strongbox, black magic. And Chabi knew. That's the kicker. She knew he was corrupt, she knew he was dangerous, and she protected him for decades.
She protected the system. This is the nuance the book demands we grapple with. Chabi didn't like Ahmad. She respected his utility. You have to understand the bind Kublai was in. The Mongol nobles didn't want to pay taxes. They thought they owned the world by right of conquest. The Chinese bureaucrats didn't want to fund Mongol expansion. Ahmad's corruption, that surplus, was what funded the schools. It funded the army. It funded the White Stupa. When she tells her son Zhenjin, moral purity is a position, not a policy, she is articulating a hard truth about statecraft. You cannot have the civilized institutions without the dirty money that builds them.
That is a terrifying justification. Moral purity is a position, not a policy. That's essentially permission to allow monsters to run your government as long as they balance the books. Look at the education of Crown Prince Zhenjin. You see Chabi trying to teach him the management of contradictions. I see her destroying her son's moral compass.
I disagree. She was trying to save him from being eaten alive. Zhenjin was an idealist. He wanted to audit the accounts. He wanted to quote Mencius to men who only understood power. Chabi knew that if Zhenjin tried to run the empire on Confucian morality alone, the generals would revolt or the treasury would collapse. She wasn't destroying his compass. She was trying to show him the map of the real world, a map that includes swamps, not just highroads.
But she broke him. The tragedy of the book is that Zhenjin cannot reconcile the two halves of his identity, the Chinese scholar and the Mongol heir. He tries to bring the petition against Ahmad, and Chabi shuts him down because it threatens the system. That failure contributes to his illness and death. She sacrificed her own son's conscience and eventually his life on the altar of this pragmatic corruption. And for what? For a finance minister who kept human skins in a box? Is that the exchange rate for a dynasty?
For an empire that lasted a century. For a dynasty that transitioned from nomadic raiding to sedentary governance. If she allows Zhenjin to destroy Ahmad too early, the revenue stops. If the revenue stops, the stability ends. She was holding back the chaos even if it meant holding hands with a man like Ahmad. It's the mirror again. She had to reflect Ahmad's utility while concealing the cost until the cost became too high. She was timing the detonation.
And that brings us to the ultimate expression of that mirror, the cultural synthesis. You argue she built a universal empire. I argue she built a facade, a beautiful screen to hide the slaughter.
It was more than a facade. Look at the Phagpa script and the White Stupa. These weren't just vanity projects. Chabi understood that to rule China, the Mongols couldn't just be occupiers. They had to be patrons. They had to own the culture.
Explain the Phagpa script for our listeners because it plays a huge role in the middle chapters, and it's a bit technical.
Right. So the empire is vast. You have speakers of Mongolian, Chinese, Tibetan, Persian, Turkic. Communication is a nightmare. Chabi commissions the Phagpa Lama to create a universal writing system. It's a square script designed to phonetically transcribe all the languages of the empire. Think of it as a medieval attempt at a universal translator or a unified operating system for the entire continent.
And administrative Esperanto that nobody actually wanted to use. The scholars hated it.
But the intent matters. It was a tool of unification. And the White Stupa, she explicitly says, it should be Nepali in conception, Chinese in engineering, Mongol in patronage. She was weaving these cultures together. She wanted the Yuan to be the sum of all parts, not just a Mongol boot on a Chinese neck. She was trying to create a shared identity.
It was manufactured, just like the Green Mount was a manufactured spring.
Walker juxtaposes these high-minded cultural projects with horrific violence. This is where the editing of the book is brilliant. We have Chabi discussing the theology of the White Stupa, how it represents emptiness. And in the very next chapter, her husband's generals are massacring 200,000 people at Chengzu. They are discussing the curvature of the dome while the city burns.
But she wasn't the one swinging the sword at Changzhou. In fact, she's the one trying to mitigate the humiliation of conquest. Look at how she treated the Song Empress Dowager. This is a crucial scene.
That was the ultimate cynical act. I don't see it that way. The Mongols conquer the Song Dynasty. Usually, the royal family would be slaughtered or enslaved. That is the standard operating procedure. Chabi refused to loot the Song treasury. She told Kublai, taking them says we are conquerors. Preserving them says we are the next dynasty. She treated the fallen empress with dignity, sat her at the high table. She transformed a moment of humiliation into a moment of succession. That isn't cynicism, that is statesmanship.
She ensured the Yuan would be seen as a legitimate Chinese dynasty, not just a barbarian interlude.
It was statesmanship built on a lie. She sat the Song Empress at the high table while the moats of Changzhou were filled with bodies. It's the mirror again, showing the Chinese what they wanted to see, a respectful successor, while reversing the image, the brutal conqueror. And the white stupa is the perfect symbol for this. Chabi calls it a structure representing emptiness. I think Walker is telling us that the moral core of her empire was empty. It was a beautiful white stone shell wrapping around a void where the conscience should have been. It looked like civilization, but it was just a prettier cage.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it ignores the stability she achieved. The stupa stood for 700 years. The Tagfa script, while it didn't replace Chinese, allowed the administration to function across vast distances. You can call it a shell, but it was a shell that protected millions of people from the anarchy that usually follows conquest. Chabi's silence was the glue holding the empire together. Without her, it's just warlords fighting over ash.
And yet, look at the ending. The conclusion of the book is devastating. It rips that stability apart.
It is tragic, yes. When Chabi dies, the system collapses almost immediately. Ahmad is assassinated. Zhenjin dies of grief and frustration. Kublai descends into alcoholism and obesity.
Which proves my point. The system was rotten.
No, to me, this proves her value. She bore the weight of the contradictions. She was the Silent Khagan who operated in the shadows so the light could shine on the throne. When she was gone, there was no one left to balance the ledger or weave the bowstring. She was the only one who knew how to manipulate the mirror without breaking it.
Or it proves that the system was unsustainable from the start. It collapsed because it relied entirely on one woman's willingness to compromise morality for power. She didn't build a structure that could stand on its own virtues. She built a structure that stood on her secrets. The strong box with the flayed skins is the true legacy of her pragmatism. When they finally open it, Kublai is horrified, but he allowed it. She allowed it. The book ultimately shows that a civilization built on the silence of victims, the starved, the massacred, the exploited, it cannot stand.
I think that's the question Walker leaves us with. We see Kublai alone on the Green Mount after her death. He's drinking from her cup, the one she used at the coronation. He's looking at the evergreen trees, this manufactured spring. He's realizing that the memory of the green is all he has left.
It's a haunting image. The trees are fake in a sense, transplanted to hide the gray winter, just like the empire was transplanted. And he's left holding the cup of a woman whose name history largely forgot, realizing that the cost of his glory was everything he actually loved. He lost his brother, his son, and his wife, all to build a city that eventually kicked his descendants out.
And yet, the city remained. Beijing remained. The concept of a unified China remained. The paradox of Chabi is that she was both the architect of a golden age and the author of its dark underbelly. She suggests that perhaps you cannot have one without the other. That to build something that lasts, you have to get your hands dirtier than we want to admit.
And I suggest that if that is the price of civilization, if the price is a box of skins and a field of starved children, then the price is too high. We have to find a way to build without the blood.
That is the debate the Silent Khagan forces us to have. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the costs of empire.
Thank you. It's a book that doesn't let you look away.
Until next time on The Debate.